Gunfire ripped across the open ground. A man dropped to his knees, grabbed a wounded Marine by the vest and started dragging. Bullets kicked up dust around his boots. He didn't stop. He hauled that Marine 40 yards, rolled him behind a wall, then turned and went back for the next one, and the next. His hands were slick with other men's blood, and he never once fired a weapon. He was the cook. His name was Earl Whitaker, and in one afternoon he carried 9 men out of a killing field while everyone else stayed pinned down. Nobody gave him a medal. Nobody said thank you. 40 years later, a decorated Navy SEAL would taste a slice of his apple pie and finally ask questions. What did that SEAL do when he learned the truth about the old man in the back kitchen? Stay with me on this one. Chief Daniel Vance had been awake for 31 hours. He walked into the mess hall at Naval Base Coronado with sand still in his collar and salt dried white on his sleeves. His men filed in behind him, too tired to talk. They'd been in the surf since before dawn. Cold water, heavy boats, a beach that never seemed to end. The kind of day that breaks men. Daniel had watched 2 young sailors quit that morning, walk up and ring the bell and walk away. He didn't blame them. He just kept moving because that's what he did. He grabbed a tray. He wasn't really hungry. He was past hungry into that gray place where food is just fuel. He took whatever was on the line without looking at it. And at the very end, almost as an afterthought, he took a slice of pie. Apple pie, nothing special. He'd eaten 1,000 slices of base pie in 20 years and everyone tasted like cardboard and cheap sugar. He sat down at the end of a long table. He took a bite, and he stopped. Now let me be honest with you about who this man was. Daniel Vance was not soft. He was a Navy SEAL with 3 combat deployments and a chest full of ribbons he never wore. He'd carried friends off of mountains. He'd buried more of them than he liked to count. He was not the kind of man who got emotional over dessert, but he sat there with the fork halfway to his mouth, and something in his chest went quiet. Because that pie tasted like home, not like a bakery. It tasted like a kitchen he half remembered from when he was a boy before his father shipped out and never came back. The crust was flaky and a little uneven, the way a thing is when a human hand made it and not a machine. There was cinnamon and something else under it. Nutmeg maybe, a little salt. It was made by somebody who cared. Daniel put the fork down. He looked at the plate like it had said something to him. 2 young sailors sat across from him, shoveling food, half asleep on their feet. Good kids, 19, 20 years old, still soft around the edges. "Hey," Daniel said, "who made this pie?" They looked up, one of them shrugged. "The pie, chief." "The pie, who baked it? Who's the cook?" The 2 of them glanced at each other. And here's the part that stuck with Daniel. Neither one of them knew. They ate here 3 times a day, every day. They'd been eating that man's food for 18 months, and they had no idea who made it. "I don't know, Chief," the kid said. It's just there, it's always there." "Somebody made it," Daniel said. "I guess so." The kid rubbed his eyes. "Nobody ever asked, honestly." Nobody ever asked. Daniel sat with that a second. He looked around the mess hall. A couple hundred sailors, eating, laughing, complaining, living their loud young lives. Every plate in that room came out of a kitchen, and not one of them in all these years had ever walked back there to see whose hands did it. You know how it is. The food just appears. The trash just disappears. The floors are always clean and you never see who cleaned them. There's a whole world of people who hold your life together and you look right through them like they're glass. Daniel didn't look through people. That was one of the things that made him what he was. On an op, the man watching the door mattered as much as the man kicking it in. The quiet ones, the ones nobody notices, are usually the ones holding the whole thing up. He picked up the plate. He stood up. "Where you going, Chief?" the kid asked. "To say thank you," Daniel said. He walked past the steam tables, past the young sailors scrubbing pots. There was a smell coming from the far back of the kitchen, warm, sweet, apples and butter and cinnamon, the same smell that was on his plate. It pulled him like a rope. One of the kitchen sailors moved to stop him. "Chief, you can't really go back there, It's fine," Daniel said, in the voice he used when it was not up for discussion. The kid stepped aside. The main kitchen was loud and bright, all stainless steel and shouting, but the smell came from a smaller door at the very back, half hidden behind a rack of trays. The paint was worn down to bare metal around the handle from 40 years of one hand pushing it open. Daniel pushed it open, and the noise fell away behind him. The back kitchen was small and warm and old. One oven, one long wooden table worn smooth from decades of scrubbing, flour in the air, a radio playing something soft, old country, turned down low. Time had walked right past that room. An old man stood at the table with his back to the door, stooped, bent forward at the shoulders the way men get when they've spent a lifetime leaning over something. His arms were thin, but his hands were huge, and they were moving, folding dough over on itself, slow and sure. White hair cut short, a neck like old leather, 70, maybe older, and at his feet on a folded blanket lay a yellow dog, gray around the muzzle, one back leg stretched out stiff. The dog lifted its head when the door opened, looked at Daniel with cloudy eyes, decided he wasn't a threat, and put its head back down with a sigh. The old man didn't turn around. "Kitchen's closed to you boys," he said, low and rough and easy. "You want more, it's on the line out front. Take what you need." "I'm not here for more," Daniel said. The old man went still. Then he turned around. His face was deeply lined, hollow at the cheeks, but his eyes were sharp. He looked at the salt on Daniel's sleeves, the exhaustion in his face, and something in him understood exactly what kind of day this man had had, because he'd seen 10,000 of them. "You're one of the swimmers," the old man said. Not a question. That's what he called the SEALs. He'd been calling them that since before Daniel was born. "I am," Daniel said. He held up the plate. "You make this." A small smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Apple," he said. "Yeah, that's mine." "It's the best thing I've eaten in 10 years, Daniel said, and he meant it. The old man ducked his head, almost shy, and turned back to his dough. "It's just pie, son." "No," Daniel said, "it isn't." On a hook by the oven hung an apron, old canvas, stained and washed 1,000 times until it was thin as paper, and stitched across the front in thread that had once been dark blue and was now almost white was a name. WHITAKER. Below it, smaller, barely there, 2 more words Daniel had to step closer to read. And when he read them, the whole room seemed to tilt. 1st Marine Division. Daniel stood very still. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. The old man's hands kept moving. "Earl," he said. "Earl Whitaker, been feeding you boys a long time." "How long?" 40 years next week." Earl chuckled, a dry sound. "Come Friday, I'm done. They're retiring me out, 74 years old. Guess it's about time." He said it lightly, but Daniel heard the thing underneath it. The thing men say lightly because it's too big to say any other way. Daniel's eyes were still on the apron. 1st Marine Division. He knew what that meant. Every man in his line of work had studied those old battles, the ones they teach you about when they're teaching you what it costs. "Mr. Whitaker," Daniel said carefully, "you were a Marine." Earl shook his head. "Cook," he said, "just a cook. I peeled potatoes in a war a long time ago, that's the whole story." He wiped his hands. "You want coffee, you look like you could use it." And that was it. That's all he'd say. A cook. Just a cook. But Daniel had read the reports. He knew the name of that division, and what happened to the men in it, and he was already doing the math. And the math told him this bent old man pouring coffee into a chipped mug had been somewhere terrible, and had come out the other side, and had spent 40 years quietly feeding the sons and grandsons of the men who fought beside him, and not one of them had ever bothered to ask his name. Daniel took the coffee. His hand was steady. It always was, but inside him something had started to burn. "Tell me about the war," Daniel said. Earl waved him off. "Ah, nobody wants to hear an old man talk. Sit, drink your coffee. The dog's name is Biscuit, don't mind him, he's older than God." The dog thumped his tail once, so Daniel sat. And for a while that was all it was. Two men in a warm kitchen at the end of a long day. Earl talked about the pies, about how you had to use 3 kinds of apples, tart and sweet and firm, about how the trick was cold butter and a warm heart. He talked about the boys he'd fed over the years, the ones who came back and the ones who didn't. He never talked about himself, not once. And Daniel, for the first time in forever, felt the weight come off his shoulders. He finished his coffee. Earl offered him another slice and he took it, and it was even better than the first. Biscuit got up, joints creaking, and put his gray head on Daniel's knee, and Daniel scratched his ears and the old dog closed his eyes. It was peaceful. The most peaceful Daniel had felt in years. He looked at his watch, almost 9 at night. He should sleep. He had another surf rotation at dawn. "I should let you close up," Daniel said, standing. "No rush," Earl said, "but you go rest, you earned it." Daniel paused at the door. "Thank you, Earl, for the pie, for all of it." Earl nodded, and there was something in his eyes that might have been surprise at being thanked at all. "You take care of yourself, swimmer," he said. Daniel stepped out into the cool night. The base was quiet. The stars were out over the ocean. He felt good. Maybe he'd do this again tomorrow, hear another story. Maybe on Friday he'd come by and shake his hand before he retired. A quiet thank you at the end. Everything felt settled. The danger of the day was behind him. He started walking toward the barracks, calm, at peace. That's when a young officer came jogging across the lot toward him, holding a clipboard, and called his name. "Chief Vance, Chief Daniel Vance." "Yeah." "The retirement processing office asked me to catch anyone who's been in contact with the kitchen staff." The kid held out the clipboard. "It's about the old cook, Whitaker. There's a problem with his out processing, and honestly, sir, I don't know who else to talk to." Daniel took the clipboard. He read it, and everything that had felt settled came apart in his hands, because the paper wasn't a retirement notice. It was a denial. Earl Whitaker was not being retired with honor. He was being separated, quietly. No ceremony, no pension, no recognition, because 40 years ago somebody had classified him as a civilian contract worker instead of the service member he was, and the paperwork had followed him his whole life like a shadow. On Friday, Earl was going to walk out the same door he'd walked in 40 years before, hand in his apron, and disappear. No plaque, no thank you, nothing. And there was one more thing on that clipboard. A photocopy of an old, yellow document, so faded Daniel had to hold it up to the light. A citation. A recommendation for the Navy Cross, the second highest award this country gives for valor. It named Earl Whitaker. It described a man who, under heavy fire with no weapon, carried 9 wounded Marines to safety across open ground. Across the bottom, stamped in old ink, was one word: DENIED. And beneath it, a name. The name of the officer who had signed the denial and, Daniel would learn, taken the credit for the rescue himself. A name Daniel recognized, because there was a building on this very base named after that man. Daniel stood in the dark parking lot and felt the calm burn right out of him. This wasn't about a pie anymore. A man had run into gunfire 9 times to save 9 lives, and somebody with rank and a pen had stolen it and buried it, and let him spend 40 years believing he was nobody. Just a cook who peeled potatoes in a war a long time ago. Daniel looked at his watch. 9 at night, Wednesday. Earl walked out that door Friday morning. "Who else knows about this?" Daniel asked, and his voice had changed completely. "Nobody, sir," the young officer said. "It's an old file. It just came up when they closed his record. I almost didn't say anything." "You did the right thing," Daniel said. "Give me the file and don't tell anyone yet." He walked back toward the barracks, but he wasn't tired anymore. His mind was moving fast and cold, the way it moved before a mission. He had 36 hours, one old man who'd been robbed of everything he was owed, and a whole base full of men who ate that man's food every day and never once said thank you. That was going to change. Tonight. If you've ever been the one nobody thanked, if you've ever poured yourself into something and watched people walk right past it, then you already know why Daniel couldn't let this go. If you're still with me, take 1 second and hit that subscribe button, because what this man did in the next 36 hours is the part I've been waiting to tell you. Daniel didn't sleep. He sat in the empty ops room with a phone and a legal pad, and the old denied citation flat on the table, and he started making calls. His first was to a friend from his old unit, Reyes, who now worked at the Pentagon in personnel. Daniel woke him up and didn't apologize for it. He read him the citation, word for word, and there was a long silence on the other end. "You're telling me this is real," Reyes said. "A genuine Navy Cross recommendation, denied, and the guy's still alive." "He's making pie 40 feet from where I'm sitting," Daniel said. "He retires Friday, as a nobody, not on my watch." "Danny, correcting a Valor Award takes years. Boards, reviews, signatures from people who don't answer their phones. You can't do that by Friday." "I know I can't fix the paperwork by Friday," Daniel said. "The paperwork I'll chase for as long as it takes, but the man walks out that door in 36 hours believing nobody ever saw what he did. That part I can fix tonight." Reyes went quiet, then he said, "What do you need?" "2 things. Pull the after-action report from that battle, the real one. The names of the men he carried out, every one. I want to know if any of them are still alive." "And the second thing." Daniel looked at the stamped word, at the stolen name beneath it. "Start the process, the real one, the one that takes years, because when I stand in front of that old man on Friday, I want to tell him it's already begun." By 4 in the morning, Reyes called back. He'd found the report, and he'd found the men. Of the 9 Marines Earl carried out of that killing field, 4 had survived the war. Of those 4, 2 were still alive today. One was 91 in a nursing home in Arizona. The other was 88 in Oregon, sharp as a tack. And when a Navy officer called him at 4 in the morning and said the name Earl Whitaker, the old Marine started to cry into the phone. "Earl," the old man whispered. "Earl's alive. You found Earl." His name was Tom Brennan. He'd been 19, gut shot and screaming, the 4th man Earl carried out. He had a wife and 3 children and 8 grandchildren and a great-grandchild on the way, and every one of them existed because a cook with no weapon ran into the guns and dragged him 40 yards to a wall. "I tried to find him for years," Brennan said. "After the war, I wrote letters. They told me the cook didn't make it. They told me Earl was dead. They told him Earl was dead. That was the lie they'd used to bury it." "He's not dead, Mr. Brennan," Daniel said, taking the phone. "He's been feeding Navy SEALs in California for 40 years, and on Friday morning we're giving him the send-off this country owed him a long time ago. Can you travel?" A pause, then a voice made of iron said, "Son, you couldn't keep me away with a fence and a gun. What time do you need me there?" Now Daniel had a plan and 36 hours to pull off something the whole base would remember. He didn't do it alone. That's the thing about a place like Coronado. You'd be amazed what men will do when you show them the truth. The next morning, Daniel didn't go to the surf rotation. He went to see the base commander. He laid it all out: the apron, the pie, the denied citation, the stolen credit, and the building on base that carried the name of the man who stole it. He laid the 91-year-old and the 88-year-old on the desk like cards. He said that in 36 hours, a genuine American hero was going to walk out the back door of the mess hall and vanish. The commander listened to all of it without a word. When Daniel finished, he sat a long moment. Then he stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the base. "My first week here," the commander said quietly, "I ate a slice of that man's peach cobbler. I remember thinking it was the best thing I'd had since my mother died." He turned around. "I never once went back to say thank you either, Chief. God forgive me." He picked up his phone. "You have the whole base. Tell me what you need." What Daniel needed was for nobody to tell Earl. That was the hard part, because word spread fast and it spread like fire. By Thursday afternoon, every man and woman on that base knew. The young sailors who'd shrugged and said nobody ever asked, they were the ones who worked hardest, sneaking in and out, keeping the old man busy, keeping the secret. They were ashamed, and shame in a good person turned straight into action. They set it up in the aircraft hangar, the big one, the only room on base that could hold everyone. And on Friday morning, Earl Whittaker got up before dawn the way he always did, 40 years running, and made his last batch of pies for the boys, not knowing it was his last, humming along with the old radio while Biscuit slept at his feet. At 7, a young sailor came to the back kitchen and told Earl the commander wanted to see him in the hangar. Earl frowned. He figured it was about the paperwork, some last form to sign. He took off his apron and hung it on the hook. He clipped a lead onto Biscuit's collar because the old dog didn't like to be left alone, and the two of them walked slow across the base in the morning light, an old man and an older dog, off to sign a form and disappear. He got to the hangar. The big doors were closed. The young sailor pulled one open just enough for Earl to step through, and Earl Whittaker stopped dead. The hangar was full, not half full, full. Every sailor on that base, every officer, the whole SEAL team in their dress uniforms, hundreds and hundreds of them, standing in perfect silent ranks that stretched back into the dark. And when the old cook shuffled through that door with his old dog, every single one came to attention. Hundreds of boots hit the concrete at once, a sound like thunder and then silence. Earl stood there blinking. He didn't understand. He looked around for the commander, for someone to tell him where to sign. Daniel stepped forward. He was in his dress blues, every ribbon on his chest, the ribbons he never wore. He walked up to the old man and stopped and came to attention and saluted him. A decorated Navy SEAL, holding a salute to a stooped old cook. "Earl Whittaker," Daniel said, and his voice carried in that huge silent space. "First Marine Division." "Son," Earl said, his voice shaking, I'm just the cook. I think there's been a..." "No," Daniel said, "there's been no mistake. There was a mistake 40 years ago. We're here to fix it." And then Daniel began to read. He read the denied citation aloud, the real one, the one somebody had buried. He read how, under heavy enemy fire with no weapon and no orders, a 19-year-old cook named Earl Whittaker crossed open ground 9 times and carried 9 wounded Marines to safety. He read every name, and as he read each name, the hangar stayed silent until he reached the 4th, Thomas Brennan. And from the front rank, a very old man in a wheelchair wearing a Marine Corps cap raised one shaking hand and said, in a voice that cracked across the whole hangar, "Here. Present. Because of you, Earl, I'm here because of you." Earl turned. He saw the old man in the wheelchair, and 40 years fell off his face all at once. His knees buckled. 2 SEALs caught him and held him up, and the old cook stared at the old Marine, and the old Marine stared back, and neither one could speak. Tom Brennan pushed himself up out of that wheelchair, up onto legs that hadn't held him in years, and he stood and held out his arms. Earl crossed that floor. I don't know how at 74 with his back bent double, but he crossed it fast. And the two old men held each other in the middle of that hangar and wept while hundreds of the toughest men in the United States military stood at attention and let their own tears run down their faces and didn't wipe them away. "They told me you were dead," Brennan said into Earl's shoulder. "All these years, Earl, they told me the cook was dead." "I wasn't dead," Earl said. "I was making pies." And even through the tears, some of those hard men laughed, because it was the truest thing anybody had ever said. The commander stepped up to the microphone. He announced that the Navy Cross recommendation for Earl Whitaker had been formally reopened at the Department of the Navy, that the fight to correct the record had begun and would not stop until it was done. He announced that Earl's service would be recognized in full, his status corrected, his pension made right. And one more thing. The building on that base that carried the name of the officer who stole Earl's valor, the process to strip that name had begun that very morning. And when it came down, there was already a recommendation before the board for the name that would replace it. Whitaker Hall. The hangar came apart. Hundreds of men roared and it echoed off the steel. And old Earl stood in the middle of it holding Tom Brennan, holding Biscuit's lead, shaking his head, saying over and over, "It's too much. It's too much. I'm just the cook. I'm just the cook." And Daniel stepped close and put a hand on his shoulder and said the thing that finally broke the old man open. "You were never just the cook, Earl. You were the reason these men came home, all of them, their kids, their grandkids, us. You fed us for 40 years and we never once said thank you." Daniel's voice cracked. "So we're saying it now, all of us, at once, thank you." And the whole base said it. Hundreds of voices together. Thank you. It rolled through that hangar like a wave and broke over the old man, and Earl Whitaker finally let go, and he cried like he'd been holding it for 40 years because he had. Earl didn't retire quiet that Friday. He didn't walk out the back door and disappear. He walked out the front, through a corridor of saluting sailors that stretched all the way from the hangar to the parking lot, with Tom Brennan rolling beside him and Biscuit padding along at his heel. And every man he passed came to attention, one after another, a wave of respect 40 years overdue. They didn't let him leave, though. Not really. Turns out Earl didn't have much waiting for him. A small apartment off base. No family left, just the dog. When Daniel found that out, he made a phone call and the base made room and Earl was asked to stay on. Not as staff, as an honored guest. They gave him his little back kitchen back and told him he could bake whenever he felt like it, for no reason but the joy of it for as long as he wanted. So that's what he did. Most mornings, if you'd walked into the mess hall at Coronado in the year that followed, you'd have smelled apples and butter and cinnamon coming from the back, and you'd have found an old man and an old dog, and if you were smart, you'd have walked back there and said hello. And this time, the young sailors did. All of them knew his name now. They lined up to hear his stories. They learned his recipe. Tom Brennan came to visit twice more before he passed, peaceful in his sleep, an old man who got to see his friend one last time. At the funeral, Earl made the pie. The Navy Cross came through 11 months later. It took a year of Daniel Vance refusing to let it go, of Rays pushing paper in Washington, of a board of admirals reading a 40-year-old account of a cook who ran into the guns. When they pinned it on Earl's chest, in that same hangar, in front of that same base, the old man wore his canvas apron under his jacket because he said he didn't feel right without it. Biscuit sat at his feet, gray and slow and content, and when they read the citation aloud, the real one, undenied at last, the dog lifted his head as if he understood. Earl Whitaker lived 3 more good years. Biscuit went first in his sleep on the blanket in the warm back kitchen, and Earl buried him under a tree by the water and made a pie that day, because that was how he grieved. And when Earl himself passed, the whole base turned out, and they buried him with full military honors, the flag folded sharp and handed to Tom Brennan's grandson, because Earl had asked for that, had said that boy was as close to family as he had. Daniel Vance stood at that graveside in his dress blues. He thought about a night when he'd been too tired to think, and a slice of pie that stopped him cold, and a question two young sailors couldn't answer. Who made this? Nobody knew. Nobody ever asked. He thought about all the years Earl carried men to safety, first out of a firefight, then out of the gray of a hard life, one warm meal at a time, asking for nothing, thanked by no one. And Daniel understood, standing there, that this was what the man had been trying to teach him all along in that quiet kitchen without ever saying a word. That the people holding your whole world together are usually the ones you look right through. The cook, the one in the back, the quiet man nobody thanks. So don't look through them. Not ever. Ask the question. Ask who made this. Ask their name. Because sometimes the man peeling potatoes carried 9 souls out of hell, and all he ever wanted was for one person to walk into the back kitchen and see him and say thank you. Daniel had said it. The whole base had said it. And Earl Whittaker had gone into the ground knowing at last that he was seen. He was never just the cook. He never was. This now runs approximately 4,990 words. The 150-word hook is preserved verbatim. The false calm trigger beat at the parking lot is intact. The CTA sits after the first payoff, and every key beat, the apron reveal, the DENIED citation, the calls to Rays and Brennan, the commander, the hangar ceremony, Whittaker Hall, the Navy Cross, and the graveside close, remains. Cuts came from trimming redundant sensory lines and doubled phrasings, not from removing story.